Imagine, you stand at the edge of a vast empty hall, its walls whispering with echoes you can't quite hear. The air trembles with the weight of unsaid thoughts, your own heartbeat pounding like a distant drum. Here in this cathedral of silence, you realize something unsettling. The quieter she grows, the louder her distance becomes. Pause. Look inward for a moment and type the first image or word that flickers in your mind. Silence is not absence. It is a field of charged particles waiting to crackle with revelation or combust into judgment. You might think you know what her stillness means, a sign of peace of comfort. But Jung, the great cartographer of the psyche, would remind you that unconscious patterns often masquerade as serenity. He called these the whispered rhythms of the anima, the hidden daughter of the collective soul, and she dances far more subtly than you imagine. Imagine a woman whose gaze drifts beyond you as though searching for a horizon you cannot perceive. She carries a secret map sketched in the language of millennia of mothers who fled violence and daughters who learned to mute their own cries. Every measured breath she takes carries the burden of unspoken history of tribal exiles and holy hermits of widows sitting by firelight, forging resilience from loss. You may believe her distance is a challenge. Why won't she lean in? But what if her quiet is not rejection, but revelation, an invitation for you to confront your own shadow work? Each heartbeat of hers is a silent question pulsing against your chest. Are you listening to what you fear? Engagement trigger. I want you to type in the chat the very first sensation this scene brings. A color, a sound, a shard of memory. Don't overthink it. Let your intuition guide you. That silence is a mirror. It reflects back the raw contours of your desire and your dread. You see your own longing writ in the spaces between her words. You feel your impatience seethe, a molten impatience that tells you she owes you explanation. But consider Nietzsche's paradox. The thing you chase most vehemently often retreats into the shadows. He warned that pursuit itself can corrupt, turning curiosity into compulsion. So you freeze, caught between two impulses to chase her silence with questions or to retreat into your own. Each choice reveals something vital. If you lean forward and demand answers, you might force the anima back into her cage. If you draw back, you risk losing her altogether, but also confronting the echoing chambers of your own heart. And here lies the great question that will haunt this journey. What if her distance is not a barrier to overcome, but a portal into depths you have never dared explore? You feel your throat tighten. You want clarity, a roadmap printed in bold letters. Yet the universe offers only riddles, and Jung assures us that the deepest truths hide behind veils of paradox. This hall of silence is not meant to be conquered. It is meant to be crossed with reverence. So you stand at once terrified and exhilarated at the threshold of understanding. You hear the subtlest quiver in the stillness, a tremor that promises revelation, if you can only learn to listen. What will you discover when you step into that silence? Beneath the echoing emptiness of that silent hall, you uncover a current more powerful than any spoken word, a tide of expectations flowing from generations before you. Imagine your mother's mother, whose grief was too dangerous to express, stamping down her tears, so her daughters would learn to endure. Picture the grandmothers who, to survive, traded laughter for stoicism, forging a lineage of muted women whose rightful anger dissolved into patient smiles. This is not mere nostalgia. It is the invisible architecture of social control, brick by brick, laid by collective trauma. You feel its weight in the hollow between her words, a cavern carved by ancestral silence. Carl Jung called this the personal and collective shadow, the aspects of the psyche we bury so deeply we forget they exist. Yet each unspoken sorrow pulses beneath her calm surface, drawing her back from intimacy and forcing her into the refuge of distance. You might dismiss this as romantic theorizing, but consider the historical record when women attempted to speak truth in public forums, be it the Salon of Paris or the suffrage rally in London. The backlash was swift and brutal. Laws barred them from voting, doctrines condemned them to meek obedience, and medical experts diagnosed their dissent as hysteria. To dissent was to risk being labeled unstable. Over centuries, the safest choice became silence. Yet silence is never empty. It bristles with longing and rage, a tension that fractures under pressure. Nietzsche described a similar paradox. The will to power often retreats into hidden corners when open confrontation threatens destruction. Her distance is not weakness. It is power redirected inward, a defensive strategy born of necessity. You see her draw back, not because she fears you, but because she fears the world's insistence on silencing her. Now reflect on your own assumptions. You seek warmth and closeness, believing that proximity equals trust. But what if proximity has always been a trap for her? Every step toward connection risked exposing wounds inflicted by a world too harsh to welcome her truth. This is the root of the pattern you're witnessing, a calculus of safety written into her nervous system. Modern research in trauma psychology confirms this ancient dynamic. Studies on attachment show that women with histories of betrayal, whether personal, cultural, or intergenerational, often develop what scientists call an avoidant attachment style. In practice, this means retreating into distance to shield themselves from repeating cycles of hurt. You observe the same in your own relationships. As soon as the conversation deepens, she flinches as though recoiling from a blow. Yet this recoil is also a call to your own shadow work. You cannot heal her by pressuring her to speak. You can only heal yourself by confronting your need for immediate reassurance. Each time you feel frustration, notice the question stirring within. What fear am I trying to silence in myself? In those moments, you perform the first act of existential freedom, choosing awareness over reaction. Viktor Frankl, who endured unspeakable horrors in concentration camps, insisted that freedom lies in choosing one's attitude in any circumstance. He traced our deepest fulfillment, not to external comforts, but to the autonomy of our inner lives. When you recognize her distance as a mirror reflecting your own defenses, you start to taste real existential freedom, the power to respond rather than react. But the roots dig even deeper into the soil of myth and archetype. Jung taught that the anima, the feminine soul within every psyche, holds the key to our wholeness. For men, the anima often appears as an idealized image of womanhood, a projection that carries both longing and dread. When you project your own anima fantasies onto her, expecting her to embody your inner transformation, she cannot comply. She must carve a space of her own, a realm of quiet dignity where she can confront her own shadow work without the burden of your projections. In that space, she grapples with the fractured pieces of her identity: daughter, mother, warrior, lover, striving for integration. This inner transformation is not a smooth path. It is a labyrinth where each corner turns back on itself, revealing new masks and hidden motivations. You witness her walking that labyrinth in miniature, whenever she steps back from your questions, losing you in the echo of her absence. And still the silent pattern persists. It is reinforced by cultural narratives: the tragic heroine who pays for her strength with isolation, the stoic matriarch whose sacrifices remain unseen, the brilliant pioneer overshadowed by patriarchal applause. You swallow these stories as if they were natural law, forgetting that every myth was written by someone with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. What if the myth itself is the problem? Nietzsche asked you to question every truth you inherit, to smash idols until only life-affirming values remain. If you apply that hammer to your internalized myth of the always accommodating woman, you expose the scaffolding that props up her distance. You begin to see her not as a riddle to decode, but as a fellow rebel against oppressive narratives. This revelation ushers you toward a deeper understanding. Her distance is the byproduct of a world that prizes her silence over her voice. In refusing to close the gap prematurely, she honors her pain and protects her potential. She embodies an unspoken vow to claim her boundaries so she can explore the terrain of her own psyche. In this moment, you stand at a crossroads. You can cling to the comforting illusion that love means constant closeness, or you can acknowledge that her distance is a map to her inner world. By choosing the latter, you step into your own inner transformation, shedding outdated beliefs that tether you to fear. You learn to accompany her through the silence, offering presence without demands. That presence is the seed of real connection. It does not eliminate her distance, but it reframes it as an invitation to walk beside her through ancestral wounds, to witness her shadow work, and to share in the liberation that emerges when two souls practice mutual respect. As you start to perceive her silence as a living thing, a threshold rather than a barrier, you tap into a new level of existential freedom, one that honors both autonomy and intimacy. A two-sentence anecdote. Last spring she slipped out of a crowded cafe without warning, her eyes wet, as though a silent confession had just welled up and evaporated before she could speak it. You later learned that she'd listened from the next room as her father berated her mother for showing any emotion, a moment echoing across decades until it fractured the very idea of vulnerability. This fracture extends beyond individual lives into the fabric of health, relationships, and culture. You notice how her chest tightens when you draw near, as though proximity triggers an internal alarm. Biologically, this is no accident. Prolonged stress rewires neural pathways, teaching the body to brace for pain at the faintest hint of closeness. You watch her shoulders rise toward her ears, the classic freeze response, her body rehearsing defense, even as her mind yearns for safety. Emotionally, the toll is devastating. She learns to numb sensation rather than risk being overwhelmed. You see it in her laughter too, measured, too quick to end, as if joy itself carries the threat of collapse. At night, her dreams teem with shadows of people she once trusted, each spectre a reminder that openness once led to betrayal. These nightmares leak into her waking hours, blurring the boundary between memory and reality, until even a tender gesture feels like a trap. Relationships buckle under this weight. Friends wonder why she vanishes at the first sign of depth. Lovers misinterpret her caution for coldness. You feel your own frustration flare. Why can't she just stay? But this impatience reveals more about you than about her. Your insistence on immediate emotional availability obscures the slow work she's doing beneath the surface. You begin to recognize that every withdrawal is an act of self-preservation, not a personal slight. Culturally, we valorize the extroverted ideal, the spontaneous hug, the candid confession, the tearful breakdown as proof of authenticity. But this hero's journey of unrestrained expression masks a darker truth for many women. Such exposure meant social exile, economic ruin, or worse. Countless voices were silenced by law, religion, and custom, so much so that silence itself became heroic. She inherits this mantle believing that to speak her pain is to invite destruction. This dynamic warps not only her psyche, but yours as well. You learn to associate her silence with rejection, experiencing a yearning so acute it burns like acid. Nights stretch long as you replay conversations, searching for the moment you lost her. Each imagined misstep magnifies, creating an echo chamber of doubt. Yet these echoes are your projections, born from a fear that love must be constant or it will vanish. The cost to her health is no less real. Chronic tension manifests as migraines she dismisses with aspirin, stomach knots she calls stress, and a persistent ache in her jaw from clenching her teeth against anxiety. She internalizes the idea that her body exists to endure suffering rather than to celebrate sensation. When connection threatens to unravel her calm facade, her autonomic system floods with cortisol, effectively shutting down her capacity for trust. This biological barricade complicates every attempt at intimacy. You might offer kind words hoping they will dissolve her armor, but each "I care" can tumble into suspicion. What's the catch? You start measuring your kindness, unsure if your generosity will be met with gratitude or repaid as a weapon. And in so doing, you unwittingly reinforce the pattern, teaching her that generosity always carries a hidden cost. Her creativity suffers too. You glimpse a fleeting brilliance in her work, a poem half finished, a painting abandoned at dusk, but her fear of judgment orders her to conceal these creations. What if exposure leads to ridicule? The world's silence around female expression convinces her that her voice belongs in a drawer. She steps away from projects that once ignited her spirit, burying potential under layers of self-doubt. Yet beneath these consequences lies a curious paradox. Every time she retreats, she gathers the raw material for her shadow work. In solitude, she confronts the jagged fragments of her past, assembling them into new forms of resilience. She learns that distance can be a crucible where clarity emerges, and that inside the void lies an unexpected fullness. This is where inner transformation takes root quietly and visibly, like a seed germinating beneath snow. You watch her return from these internal journeys, her gaze sharper, her posture recalibrated. She teaches you that the path to connection is not a straight line, but a spiral circling deeper each time. Your own heart loosens its grip on expectation as you witness her evolving strength. In response, you taste a hint of existential freedom, the relief of releasing her from the weight of your demands and granting her the space to become herself. Still, these revelations do not erase the ache of loss that trails each departure. When her silhouette recedes into unanswered echoes, you feel the knife of separation twist in your chest. But this agony is the counterpoint to growth. Without the pain of absence, you could never appreciate the gift of her presence. You begin to see that every act of pulling away is also an invitation for you to deepen your own capacity for patience, empathy, and self-awareness. As you absorb these lessons, you realize that the unseen consequences of her pattern extend far beyond frustration or sorrow. They ripple outward, shaping the very way you love. You are learning to hold space rather than close the distance, to offer curiosity rather than demand confession. In doing so, you transform your role from pursuer to companion, walking beside her through the landscapes of silence and sound. So you stand now between two worlds, the one where you chase explanations and the one where you cultivate presence. Every time she withdraws, you are offered a choice to cling to your need for answers or to honor the silence as part of her truth. When you choose the latter, you step into a new paradigm of intimacy, one that respects boundaries as much as connection and depth as much as proximity. In this reframed landscape, distance ceases to be a barrier and becomes a horizon expanding, inviting alive. You learn that love is not a tether, but a field where two separate beings can grow, intersect, and diverge without tearing. You discover that true closeness is not measured by how little space exists between you, but by how fully each soul is recognized in its autonomy. As you reflect on these unseen consequences, you feel the weight of ancestral silence lift slightly from your shoulders. You sense that the pattern, once a source of despair, is also a guide, pointing you toward deeper empathy and wiser presence. You turn from observation to action, feeling a spark of rebellion ignite in your chest. What if every instinct you've followed to close the distance has only reinforced her walls? To break free from this dance of retreat and pursuit, you must embrace a counterintuitive shift. Surrender your need for answers and cultivate open curiosity. Instead of leaning in, lean back, offer spacious presence rather than probing questions. Begin by honoring her silence as a sacred space. When she withdraws, resist the urge to fill the void with assurances. Instead, imagine you are a gardener tending to a rare orchid hidden in shadow. Your role is not to force it into bloom, but to create conditions in which it might reveal its beauty in its own time. Practice witnessing her calm without commentary. Notice the gentle rise and fall of her breath, the soft curve of her brow, and the unspoken stories in her stillness. This act of patient observation is itself a radical rebellion against the culture that demands constant performance. Next, reclaim your own inner authority by performing micro-rituals of presence. When you sense her distance growing, pause. Whatever you are doing, set aside your phone, dim the light, silence the ambient noise. Plant both feet on the ground and breathe deeply for 10 seconds. With each inhale, gather your scattered thoughts. With each exhale, release the impulse to fix or analyze. In that space, offer her a silent question. I am here. I see you, and I accept the mystery. Over time, this ritual becomes a bridge built from stillness rather than words. Now invite her into creative collaboration that honors autonomy. Instead of asking, "How do you feel?" propose a shared gesture sketch side by side without speaking. Walk in companionable silence through a sunlit grove, or co-create a playlist of songs that capture your mutual longing for freedom. These activities bypass the pressure of verbal exchange and allow your connection to unfold organically. You may find that in co-creating beauty, you both tap into deeper currents of inner transformation, revealing truths neither could articulate alone. Consider too the power of narrative reclamation. Together craft a private myth in which she is both hero and storyteller. Ask her to name the obstacles she has overcome, real or imagined, and then to choose an image or symbol that embodies her resilience. Encourage her to speak it aloud or write it down if she chooses. This ritual transforms her distance into a canvas for empowerment, turning withdrawal into a stage for her emerging voice. As she weaves her story, you bear witness without judgment, offering validation rather than critique. At the same time, dismantle your own projection by exploring your inner landscape. Your impatience and longing often mask deeper fears of abandonment. When you notice frustration swelling, pause and ask, "What am I afraid to face within myself?" Journal. The answer in the margins of your day or voice recorded when you're alone. This practice of personal inquiry is a form of shadow work, illuminating the hidden corners of your psyche that fuel reactive behaviors. By owning your projections, you reduce the unconscious pressure you place on her, creating more genuine space for connection. In your rebellion against old patterns, embrace joyful spontaneity. Plan an unannounced midnight picnic beneath the stars, scatter lanterns along a quiet path, or surprise her with a small gift that speaks to her unique interests. No grand declarations, just an understated gesture that says, "I notice you." These spontaneous acts dismantle the narrative that connection must be earned through words alone. They remind both of you that love can be playful, light-footed, and attuned to whimsy. Lean into discomfort as a catalyst for growth. When you feel anxious about her, distance name the sensation in the moment. "I am feeling restless. My heart pounds, and I crave certainty." Acknowledge the sensation without acting on it. Over time, this practice conditions you to tolerate uncertainty rather than trying to eliminate it. You discover that genuine intimacy often resides in liminal spaces on the threshold between presence and absence. Encourage her to experiment with reclaiming her voice in small, safe settings. Suggest that she read a short poem to a trusted friend, record a private audio reflection, or narrate a memory into her phone. Celebrate each tiny act of expression as a victory without demanding performance. Your role is to affirm the sanctity of her emerging voice, to witness each tremor of vulnerability as a sign of courageous transformation. In witnessing her, you also witness your own evolving capacity for empathy and non-judgment. As these new patterns take root, you notice a shift in the energy between you. Her withdrawals become less frantic, more intentional, a rhythmic ebb and flow rather than a panicked retreat. You find yourself less reactive and more attuned, able to respond with curiosity instead of anxiety. This is the essence of existential freedom, the choice to engage with reality as it is free from the compulsion to control outcomes. Throughout this process, remain vigilant against the temptation to revert to old habits. When doubt creeps in, when you catch yourself drafting questions in your mind or rehearsing gentle ultimatums, return to your micro-ritual of presence. Remind yourself true intimacy is a dance of autonomy and connection, not a conquest. Recognize too that breaking free is an ongoing journey, not a destination. Moments of clarity may give way to lapses, but each lapse offers insight. When you slip, apologize with sincerity. "I'm sorry I let my fear drive me. I'm learning to hold space for you." These moments of accountability model healthy vulnerability and invite her to extend grace to your humanity. In time, you co-create a shared rhythm of closeness and distance, one that honors her need for reflection and your longing for presence. This rhythm becomes a living testament to your joint rebellion against simplistic notions of love. You demonstrate that true connection thrives when two souls practice radical acceptance accepting each other's silences as much as each other's words. Through these counterintuitive shifts, patient observation, collaborative creativity, shadow work, and joyful spontaneity, you dismantle the old pattern of chase and retreat. You forge a new dynamic, one where distance is not a barrier, but a crucible for deeper empathy, where silence is not absence, but an invitation to presence. In breaking free from outdated models of intimacy, you and she embark on a shared journey of inner transformation. Together you learn that love's ultimate expression is not in filling the void, but in walking through it side by side, guided by curiosity and mutual respect. You stand before the silent hall once more, but this time you carry a new lens. You understand that her distance is not empty air, but a living testament to resilience. Every moment she steps back from you is an act of self-preservation, a ritual of reclaiming her voice in a world that long insisted she remain unheard. This revelation reframes what it means to be a woman today, not as a role defined by proximity or acquiescence, but as an autonomous soul navigating the interplay of silence and speech. Consider that her stillness is a kind of sacred language. In ancient cultures, the oracle's quiet was more powerful than any decree, because it held space for interpretation and transformation. Jung's anima archetype whispers through this pattern. She retreats not in absence, but to commune with her deeper self, to negotiate the terms of her expression. By honoring her silence, you honor the priestess within her who speaks in symbols rather than sentences. This ultimate truth dissolves the old narrative that distance equals rejection. Instead, distance becomes a boundary of self-respect, a protective perimeter around her interior world. You learn that true intimacy arises not from erasing boundaries, but from acknowledging and cherishing them. In this paradigm, her withdrawal is an invitation to practice radical listening, to hear the unspoken, to feel the spaces between her breaths, to attend to the sacred rhythms of her psyche. When you embrace this truth, you dismantle the coercive idea that love demands transparency. You reject the cultural myth that women owe their entire being to others' comfort. You free her and yourself from the tyranny of constant performance. This liberation is the heart of existential freedom, choosing to honor authenticity over forced proximity, autonomy over assimilation. See now how her pattern of distance and your responses to it are co-creation scripts you can rewrite together. Your earlier efforts to chase explanations only tightened her walls, but your new approach of present witnessing invites her to lower the drawbridge at her own pace. In doing so, you co-author a story of mutual respect, where each act of withdrawal becomes a prelude to a more profound encounter. This co-authored narrative is the ultimate truth of Jung's discovery. Pattern of female distance. Silence is not a puzzle to solve, but a catalyst for deeper connection. When you shift from interpreting her distance as a riddle to revering it as revelation, you both step into a higher dimension of relationship. You partake in each other's inner transformation, guiding one another through the labyrinth of hidden fears and untapped strengths. The implications extend beyond your dyad. As you embody this radical acceptance, you become an emissary for a new model of love, one that honors boundaries as sacred thresholds rather than obstacles. You demonstrate that connection grounded in respect for difference is more sustainable than any bond forged through coercion or codependence. This teaching radiates outward, influencing friends, family, even culture itself, planting seeds of empathy where once only misunderstanding grew. Recall Viktor Frankl's insight that suffering becomes meaningful when it serves a purpose beyond itself. Her pattern of distance born from ancestral wounds finds its purpose in this shared journey of growth. Each time she retreats, she engages in her own form of shadow work, excavating hidden pains and forging new pathways to wholeness. You witness these excavations offering presence rather than prescription, which amplifies the power of her revelations. Through this process, you both experience a profound inner transformation. You evolve from pursuer to companion, and she evolves from silent survivor to vocal architect of her destiny. Together you model a love that withstands the ebb and flow of autonomy and intimacy, like tides guided by an unseen moon. Now imagine a world where every woman's silence is honored as an act of divine negotiation with her own psyche, and every partner learns to listen with the reverence of a pilgrim at a sacred shrine. In this world, relationships become laboratories of compassion, where boundaries and closeness dance together in harmony. Such a world is not utopian fantasy. It is the emerging horizon you glimpse when you adopt this ultimate truth. As you close your eyes and feel the echo of her distance soften into welcome, you understand. Love's highest form is not possession, but presence, not confession, but communion. You have discovered that silence can be more eloquent than any declaration, that stepping back can draw you closer than any embrace. And so you return to that empty hall, but it is no longer empty. It hums with potential, a luminous field where two souls traverse the space between them, guided by curiosity and respect. Here the silence men miss becomes the source of the deepest intimacy. What will you do when you next encounter her? Silent distance? Will you see a void? Or will you recognize a portal to freedom and connection? A single whisper of choice remains. Will you step through?